over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of great stuff going on over there right now, including my 30 MLB season win total previews and picks for the Major League Baseball season. Also, yesterday I posted all of my futures stuff. So World Series, AL, NL pennant, AL, NL MVP and Cy Young, Home Run King, Division futures. Lots of great stuff over there to get you ready for the Major League Baseball season. Of course, you can check out Kyle Hunter's daily college basketball picks, Parker Michaels' daily NHL picks, college basketball and NBA coverage across the board from our talented cast of writers. I put up a couple of NASCAR previews this week or for this weekend, and I'll get the America East Conference Tournament preview up once we've got odds for that. So lots of stuff going on over at BangTheBook.com. Make sure you check it all out. As you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio, presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Don't forget to check out our Bang the Book YouTube page as well. And finally, I'm sure I sound a little bit different today, doing this over my phone, trying to get the best connection we possibly can with Blog Talk Radio and all of its issues yesterday. So apologies if I'm a little bit quiet. Fortunately, I can do some things in the editing process with that, but just want to make sure that we try to do the best we can to get you these shows here at such a very important time of the sports betting calendar. With that, we've got one guest here to start things off with this March 6th edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Going well. How about yourself?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much for joining me. And interesting start to yesterday's conference tournament. I mean, we talked about the Illinois-Chicago moneyline rollover. Unfortunately, they fall short in that coin flip game against Green Bay. Wright State rolls through IUPUI, a team that I kind of like. An interesting start here to the conference tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some risk taking the moneyline rollover on a team that's an underdog in the first game. And we knew that they might lose that first game. I still think it was worth the risk. And I will say, when I was looking at the end of that game, UIC really fell apart in the last 3 minutes. I think they had a 5-point lead or something like that, and then didn't score for about 3 minutes. It happens. The Horizon League is still one where it sets up pretty well for Northern Kentucky unless they slip up to somebody that they shouldn't. But that Horizon League, like we've said before, has been a league that strange things have happened. So you never know, and I think conference tournament season is about to ramp up quite a bit here as we go into the next couple days.
Yeah, most definitely is. Again, we got 5 conference tournaments to talk about. And the nice thing here today, unlike yesterday's show, and, we are kind of at the mercy of the sports books for them to put out odds, but with the Patriot, the Big South, and the Horizon starting yesterday, not a whole lot of lead time for those segments, so I apologize for that. As far as the 5 that we're going to talk about today, none of them start until Thursday. So a little bit more lead time with these. We'll try to do everything we can, obviously, to get you as much lead time as possible, especially with 19 conference tournaments next week. But, again, it was an interesting first night for the conference tournaments. Hampton and Charleston Southern, a couple of teams we talked about in the Big South, they both won in advance. So we'll keep an eye on the progress of them. And, also, too, keep in mind here, and I don't know how much you dabble in this, but I know we've talked about this here before, a lot of sports books will post updated conference tournament odds as things keep going. So that gives you a chance to dive in if you didn't get a chance before the tournament started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at the Atlantic Sun right now, some interesting odds on 5 dimes for Lipscomb -200, Liberty +198. You can even bet on what the final result will be, like the exact result of the final game, which Lipscomb beats Liberty is -126. I think things like that are certainly interesting. I don't know that there's a great amount of value there in the Atlantic Sun right now, but it's certainly interesting to keep an eye on the ones that have already started.
Well, yeah, and of course, we talked about a couple of conference tournaments yesterday where the odds have kind of moved around a little bit. Team like Fairleigh Dickinson in the Northeast Conference, that conference tournament starts tonight. They were +220 when I wrote my article. I think they were +260-ish when we did the segment yesterday. They're all the way up to +360 now. Sacred Heart, the second favorite, +310. So, yeah, a lot of movement with these here We try to do the best that we can. But by the way, Gonzaga down to minus 850 in the West Coast Conference.
Yeah, Fairleigh Dickinson might be a decent play at plus 360. I mean, as I said, they played well away from home. At plus 260, I think it was yesterday, like you said, when we were talking. Wasn't interested in them at all. Maybe a little bit of interest there. I think the Northeast is one where you have to take somebody that's not the favorite based on how wide open that league has been. Gonzaga minus 850. Can't recommend minus 850. But having said that, I don't think it's a terrible play if you made it. But I can't do it.
Well, hopefully that number keeps coming down a little bit. Again, we joked yesterday it was minus 200 in the West Coast Conference last year. Would love to get back to that point, but clearly that's not going to happen. So let's talk about the conference tournaments we haven't talked about here as of yet. We start with the MAAC, the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. This conference tournament starts here on Thursday night at the Times Union Center in Albany, New York. That is the home floor of Siena. They tend to get a home court advantage bump in the futures odds for this tournament, and yet they've never really had that strong of a showing in it. Iona is your favorite, though, at plus 290, which suggests that this is a very wide-open conference.
This is as wide open as any conference we'll talk about. I think that you can make a good argument for a bunch of teams here. The first thing I want to talk about for this conference, some stats here on the past from the past few years on how it's gone. Favorites are 72 and 55 ATS since 2005. Underdogs have done really well in the MAAC in regular season. They have not done well in the conference tournament. That could easily be noise, 72 and 55 ATS. Also, if you look at favorites of 9.5 points or more, 14 and 3 ATS in the MAAC and the MAAC. I think this is likely noise as well. I wouldn't be rushing to bet favorites of 9.5 points or more. What I will say is if you filter out teams with an ATS cover percentage of 55% or higher on the season, and our favorites in the MAAC in the conference tournament here, you've got 52 and 33 ATS. This one I like better. I think it makes sense that favorites that have a relatively low ATS cover percentage could do pretty well. So that's something to keep an eye on as you go forward. The last thing I want to say here before we get into breaking down the teams, the under is 32 and 11, and the last 43 neutral site under venue.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the Missouri Valley Conference and the under numbers at now the Enterprise Center, formerly the Scott Trade Center. Again, keep in mind, it's not a new venue, just a different name there in the Missouri Valley. That was a stone-cold under conference, and this one has been one here recently as well. And I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this here, Kyle. Do you think that that's because of the venue, or do you think that it's because this conference has had a lot of pace wars in the past? But as we've talked about, as these games grow in importance, the number of possessions generally tends to come down. So do you think that maybe this has just been a mispricing of the totals market more than anything?
I think it's both. I think that if you look at the Times Union Center, it's been a good under venue even in just Siena's home games. So, you look at this venue has been a good under venue in general, but I think it has a lot to do with it that you have some teams that play very fast in the regular season, like you're saying, and then you get into conference tournaments. It's hard to play quite as free and play at 80 possessions or 75 possessions when you know that this is your last game. Everybody's going to be concerned about not turning it over, things like that. And I think that you can get some pretty high total games in a conference like this when you have Iona or Ryder or a team like that plays really quickly in it. You get some 150s and those 155s, things like that. It's hard to go over because you don't play quite as quick, and the shooting percentages are generally not quite as good because both defenses are going to be very amped up and ready to go.
So as we look at this conference tournament here, when I wrote this preview, Iona was the favorite at plus 235. So they're now up to plus 290. Iona is the number one seed, but has a losing record for the season at 14 and 15. Canisius, the number 2 seed, also has a losing record on the year at 14 and 16. Canisius way down the board at 7-1 here for this tournament. Quinnipiac, 16-13, best regular season record overall. They're the 3 seed here, plus 415. You've got Ryder, the 4 seed. They're the second favorite on the board, plus 385. Siena, the 5 seed, but that home court advantage has them at plus 475. So this is, as we mentioned, a very wide open conference. So what are you kind of looking at here?
Well, the first thing is I think Canisius is a week 2 seed, and that's shown by the odds makers what they have been at. Isaiah Reese was a really key player for them. He was suspended. I remember it was team conduct, suspension, and if I remember correctly, he made some kind of tweet about, I'm about to go Kyrie style or something like that, which is, it's kind of funny, but then he deletes that tweet, and then the next thing you know, he's suspended. Canisius, not the same team without him. I think they have a good coach. I think this is a program that's trending in the right direction, but their upside's not as high as a lot of the other teams. So I wish that one of the teams that I wanted to back was over on the side of Canisius is the big thing for me. I think Siena's a dangerous team because of Jalen Pickett, very good freshman. Certainly watch out for this team in the future. I do not like that they have to play Ryder in the first game because Ryder's one of the other teams that I wanted to take in. And Ryder is the most talented team in this league. They kind of fell apart later in the season. Ryder did. Surprised me. You wonder if their coaching is as good as some of the other teams in this conference. But Ryder is a good team. If they can put it together, they're the most talented team in the conference. And they're the team that could give somebody the hardest time if they get into the big dance. Again, Siena and Ryder meeting in that first game makes it hard to take one of them, because who's going to win that first game? I don't know. I wish that they weren't against each other. I think that Iona being able to sneak into the top seed yet again, Iona is clearly a lot weaker than past versions, and I'm not excited to bet them. So I'm looking for somebody other than them as well. And kind of by default, I'm going to go toward Quinnipiac here. Plus 465, a pretty good price here. I think that, if you just look at it from a price standpoint, I would say they have at least a 20% chance of winning this conference tournament, which would put you at plus 400. So plus 465, pretty good price. Quinnipiac has the best player in the conference in Cam Young. So having the best player in the conference, having an easier route to get there, and then being able to hedge at least partially in the final, that would make me default toward Quinnipiac here.
Well, again, Iona not as strong as we've seen them in the past, but they have won this conference tournament 3 straight years. They've been in the finals 6 straight years. So kind of almost on principle, I sort of default to them getting the plus 290. But, again, obviously, you look at this conference top to bottom, and, St. Peter's and Manhattan, who are 2 of the bottom seeds here, even Niagara, who is the bottom seed, they're plus 3,000, St. Peter's, Manhattan, plus 5,000. So, again, that gives you an idea where a lot of the low-seeded teams in these conferences are, plus 50,000, plus 25,000, plus 10,000, stuff like that. Here, the longest price, plus 5,000. So that gives you an idea of what we have to work with here in this conference. There are some scheduling quirks here that I do want to make sure I mention before we move away from this. Seeds 6 through 11 play on Thursday in the first-round games. Friday, Iona plays the winner of Marist and St. Peter's. Canisius plays the winner of Manhattan and Fairfield. Then they have Saturday off, while Quinnipiac plays the 6-11 winner. Ryder and Siena play late Saturday. Then Ryder and Siena have a quick turnaround Sunday to play at 6 o'clock Eastern time against, in all likelihood, Iona. So Iona does have some scheduling advantages here in this conference tournament that are worth factoring into the price.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Certainly, I wouldn't be surprised if Iona wins it again. And you could bet Iona and Quinnipiac here. You could bet Iona and somebody else from the other side. That wouldn't be a terrible move here based on what the prices are. I guess that's one of the positives of taking a conference that's wide open is it's a lot easier to have more than one play in that conference. And I think that's certainly a good point. The scheduling advantages do help Iona.
Well, and again, this is a concept that we talked about yesterday and why there's so much importance to being able to try and prey on the week 2 and the week 3 seeds because, again, the teams that are, further down the board here from an odds standpoint, they avoid that number 1 seed. So if there's a week 2 or a week 3, that is something you absolutely want to attack in these conference tournaments. The concern, obviously, here is that the number 1 is relatively weak 2. But as you said, Canisius, probably one of the weakest number 2 seeds we've had in any of the conference tournaments here this week. So, sort of going with a multi-prong approach to fade them does make a lot of sense, much like we talked about, with Winthrop in the Big South, or the other one that we talked about yesterday, I can't remember right now.
Yeah, we've had several weak number 2 or 3 seeds, and I think it makes some sense to go against ones like that because, like you said, you get one weaker game, and you've got teams on the other side of the bracket playing a tough matchup every single day, and that's what you're trying to get is one easier matchup to where it's easier to get to that point. I think that makes quite a bit of sense, and I think yesterday we were talking about that maybe Murray State was a little bit overvalued as a 2 seed, so that's why we're looking at Jacksonville State.
Man, that Jacksonville State one, I can't get that out of my mind. I mean, I know Belmont's the best team there, but Jacksonville State beat them twice in the regular season. Ray Harper, such a good head coach. And again, for those that missed yesterday's show, still some time to get to that, although the Ohio Valley does start tonight. So you want to make sure you jump on that pretty quickly here. But let's transition over to the SoCon here, the Southern Conference. Wofford is now plus money. They're plus 105 to win the conference tournament. They were minus 125 when I wrote up this preview. They went a perfect 18-0 in conference play here, but they did have some scares. Not like a team like Gonzaga that rolled through the West Coast Conference. Wofford did have a couple of games that went down to the wire there. UNC Greensboro is your 2 seed, but they're plus 570 on the board. Furman is your 3 seed. They are the second favorite, plus 330. East Tennessee State, the 4 seed, they're plus 400. Not really a whole lot of chances for anybody else down the board, although Samford, a team I know you've talked about a fair amount this year, they are the 7th seed here, and they're plus 7,000.
Yeah, this conference is really interesting. I have to say the SoCon is a lot better than people realize it is. If you go back, just look at KenPom to see where these teams were and where this conference was rated out of 32 a few years ago. They were 30th in 2014. Now he rates them 11th best. This is a very good conference. They've been surprisingly deep. I think Samford's a team that's pretty talented to be 6-12. They're a young team, and they haven't really put it together. They've lost a lot of really close games, but this is a very good conference and one that I'm certainly excited to talk about. Favorites are 76 and 62 since 2005. In this one, in this conference tournament, you got favorites of 4.5 points or less, 33 and 20 ATS. U.S. Cellular Center. This is an old venue. In general, it's not been a huge under venue, a little bit of an under venue, but in the SoCon Conference Tournament, you've got under 83 and 55 since 2005, and opening totals of 136 or higher, 54 and 28 to the under. So another one that you're going to want to mark as certainly a solid under venue, solid under tournament.
Yeah, this is definitely one where you do want to look for the under to be sure. And in fact, as you also list in your notes here, opening totals of 136 or higher, 54 and 28 to the under. So with the expectation of a higher scoring game comes a pretty good opportunity to bet the under. And, let's talk about Wofford for a second here, because in general, we'd look at the SoCon as a one-bid league. And Wofford here did run the table, went 18-0 in conference play, played Furman twice, held them to 118 points in those 2 games. UNC Greensboro had 93 points in their 2 games against Wofford, and they're the 2 seed here. Does Wofford have to win this conference tournament to get into the big dance?
Oh, they better not. I mean, as weak as the bubble teams are this year, if they were ever going to get in, this has got to be the year. And I have to say, we've talked about many times in the past, these mid-major teams get shafted in many, many ways. You've got the Wofford team is 18-0 that did play a fairly difficult non-conference schedule. If they can't get in this year, regardless of what happens in the conference tournament, I wonder when they would ever get in. I think that this is certainly a year that they should get in. Now, if you're Wofford and you know that the NCAA committee has not been very kind to a mid-major, I think you probably want to make sure you win at least a game here, because if you lose in that first game and get pulled a huge upset on, then it would make some question come into your mind.
Well, as we look at the structure here for this conference tournament, starts on Friday night, again at the U.S. Cellular Center, good under venue for this conference tournament. VMI, Western Carolina, the first game. Samford takes on the Citadel in the second game. And then the 8-9 winner, who plays at 5 o'clock on Friday, has to play Wofford at 12 o'clock noon on Saturday. So pretty quick turnaround there for the winner of VMI in Western Carolina. Wofford should be safe there. But as you and I have been talking a lot over the last couple of days about these conference tournaments, Wofford, despite going 18-0 in conference play, has a very, very tough second game if things hold up in the 4-5 game.
Yeah, I think this is a conference tournament to where Wofford does not have an easy path because, their first game is going to be an easy one against VMI or Western Carolina, and they should win that game. But East Tennessee State, a 4 seed, goes against a weak 5 seed in Chattanooga. East Tennessee State should win that game. I'd be pretty surprised if they don't win that one. You get Wofford and East Tennessee State in the second game. Look, East Tennessee State almost beat them at home. Probably should have beaten Wofford at home. This is an East Tennessee State team that's been very good every year. Forbes is a really good coach, very high on him as a coach. I think that they certainly could beat Wofford, and it would not be surprising to me. I think, the fact that they have a weak 5 seed there, a game that they should easily win in their first game, helps quite a bit because, if they don't play too good, they can probably still eke out a win, get ready for Wofford. Wofford, is a team that, like you said, they're 18-0, but they have quite a few close calls here in this conference. I don't think they're, head and shoulders above everybody else as much as what some people think they may be. And East Tennessee State is a very dangerous team. The reason I like East Tennessee State as a team that could beat Wofford, too, they're the one team that can hang with Wofford when it comes to the glass. They're very good on the boards. They're actually better than Wofford rebounding, and that's certainly a big positive because if you're getting beat up on the glass and that team is very good, your opponent is very good shooting three-pointers as Wofford is, then it's really hard to keep up, because they're banging threes from way downtown, and then you've got them getting their offensive rebounds or clearing every defensive board. East Tennessee State doesn't have that problem. They're very good on the glass. They're a good defensive team. I think East Tennessee State's a very tough matchup for them in that second game.
Well, and one of the reasons why we talk about the moneyline rollover is a situation like this. East Tennessee State is plus 400 to win this conference tournament. And as you and I were talking earlier on off the air, you look at this game against Wofford, this potential game on Sunday at 4 o'clock Eastern time, Wofford's probably a 9.5, maybe even a 10-point favorite in that game. That money line is almost plus 400 in that game alone. So why would you take a futures price when you could just as easily roll over the money line and get almost a futures price in one game, and then if it's Furman in the final, which is what I think it would probably wind up being, that game's maybe a coin flip. Furman, I think, would be maybe a short favorite there of a point, something like that. Maybe another plus money price on East Tennessee State. This is the best example of the money line rollover that we've had to talk about all week.
This is definitely the best example we've had all week. Plus 400, a terrible price on East Tennessee State. It's plus 400. Definitely take the money line rollover if you like East Tennessee State. It's not even going to be close. It'll be significantly higher payout. And again, if East Tennessee State wins that game against Wofford and you don't want to put everything back into the final game, then you can just hedge by either not betting it or you can bet part of it, sit with your profit, and that's fine. There's nothing against that. If you take a futures price, first of all, in this case, it's a bad futures price, and it's harder to hedge out in that final game. So you have to determine how much you want to hedge. When your money line rollover is there, then you just say, hey, I've won X amount of money. How much do I want to put back into the next game? And then you can just decide pretty easily. I think that UNC Greensboro is a 2 seed. Their price, you could argue them as having some value here. I think they were plus 700 earlier, so plus 570, probably not a price I would like. But UNC Greensboro, the way they played against Wofford in those two games bothers me. You know, I know they did okay against the other teams, but you lose by 29 points and you lose by 30 points against a team that's the top team in the league. You know, that certainly bothers me. UNC Greensboro was picked to win this league, so they have potential. It wouldn't shock me if they go through this conference tournament, especially if they don't have to play Wofford. But East Tennessee State on the money line rollover, definitely my favorite play in this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what about Furman? I mean, what do you think about the Paladins here? I mean, again, as I mentioned, in the two games against Wofford, they only scored 118 points. So that doesn't really inspire a ton of confidence if they run into Wofford. As we talked about, there's a chance, and a fairly decent one at that they run into East Tennessee State. Would you dabble in Furman at all here or no?
Yeah, my issue with Furman is there's a couple problems. They're not good on the glass. They're going to get beat on the boards pretty badly if they play either Wofford or East Tennessee State. They also turn it over a little bit too much for me. So that's why their offensive efficiency isn't quite as good, because they don't get to the line and they turn the ball over quite a bit. So they have to shoot it really well to win. I think Furman's certainly capable. I mean, obviously they won at Villanova. They had those big wins to where they get in the top 25 at the start of the year. They're certainly capable. They won at Loyola Chicago as well. This is a Furman team that's a good team, but I don't think that they're as consistently good, and I worry that they're jump shot reliant for sure. I mean, they shoot a lot of three-pointers, so a team that I'd probably rather stay away from here.
All right, so we move on here. We take a look at the America East Conference, and these remaining conference tournaments that we're going to talk about here don't start until Saturday. The America East, the Colonial, and the Summit. And, in fact, the America East, the field just set for that tournament yesterday, so I've not seen any odds for it as of yet. So, obviously, limits what we can talk about here with this conference. But as we look at it, Vermont's the number one seed here. They're usually a team that makes some noise here in the month of March. Stony Brook is the 2 seed. UMBC, we all know what they did last year, beating Virginia. They're the 3 seed. Hartford, the 4 seed. Significant drop-off from Hartford to the rest of the teams here in this conference. These games are on campus sites. They start Saturday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. Albany at UMBC. UMass Lowell versus Hartford. Maine versus Vermont. Binghamton versus Stony Brook. And like the Northeast Conference that we talked about on yesterday's show, conference reseeds after the first round. So Vermont could have a big advantage there in the semifinals if there's an upset, or maybe Stony Brook winds up getting lucky as well if they knock off Binghamton. But Vermont appears to run into Hartford in the semifinals. And as you mentioned with Hartford, when we talked about the America East Conference, they're a very, very experienced team.
Yeah, Hartford's the most experienced team in the country. The one team more experienced than is Nevada. And that's kind of hard to believe when you look at Nevada with all the senior starters that they have. Hartford, a very experienced team, a team that's played pretty well here at the end of the season. I'm not sure Hartford's upside is quite as high as some of the other top teams. Vermont's going to be a significant favorite here. I don't know. I hate to project exactly what they'll be, maybe plus 125, plus 130, something like that. Vermont's definitely the best team in this league. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that they reseed, as Adam just pointed out, very important. It makes it far less likely that they'd have to face multiple really good teams, because if any of those upsets happen, then Vermont is in a good position. UMBC, a dangerous team for Vermont. For some reason, they've had their number. I would certainly still lean toward Vermont if those two play, based on the difference in those teams throughout the course of the season. Stony Brook's a team to watch here as well, because Stony Brook, very good defensively. If they can make some shots, they're very good on defense. Offensively, they've struggled a lot. They turn it over. They don't shoot the three well. But, if you look at this conference as a whole, Vermont's number one in defensive efficiency and number two in offensive efficiency. They're the one really balanced team in this league. Anthony Lamb, a really good player. I think that Anthony Lamb is probably the best player in this conference by a wide margin. I can't imagine anybody else in this conference being even close to as good as him. He's a future NBA player. I think Vermont is too good for everybody else here. I like to try to find underdogs. UMBC might be the team that you would look at if you get a decent enough price. Hartford, I couldn't blame you based on them being so experienced, but I really do think Vermont's going to win this one.
Well, Stony Brook, coached by, I believe, former Ohio State assistant Jeff Bowles, correct? You can correct me if I'm wrong there with that. But, they did beat Vermont twice during the regular season and did so relatively comfortably. Won the first game by 21, won the second game by 6, on the road, held Vermont to .731 points per possession. So, suffocating defensive performance from Stony Brook. I'm going to guess here, and again, we don't have odds out for this conference, but I'm going to guess that Stony Brook is going to be the value team here in this conference because you're going to get a depressed futures price on UMBC because of what they did last year. Because the books are going to say, okay, well, outside of Vermont, UMBC is the only team anybody knows in this conference. So their price is going to be pushed down a little bit because they knocked off Virginia last year. So my guess is that Stony Brook, probably a little bit of a value team, maybe, plus 275, plus 300, something like that. Thank you for correcting me here that Stony Brook did lose to Vermont both times. UMBC, the team that has Vermont's numbers. So my apologies for that. But again, the fact remains, I would guess that Stony Brook, because they don't have the history of Vermont or UMBC, probably a value team here.
Stony Brook's defense is so good that they could beat anybody. And if you look at their game on March 2nd against Vermont, at Vermont, they were ahead late in that game. They were up 46-41 with 8 minutes left. Vermont goes on a 15-4 run to finish out the game. Stony Brook's capable of winning this tournament as well. So I really think there's 3 teams that could win this conference tournament: Vermont, Stony Brook, and UMBC. I would be surprised if Hartford does it because I'm not sure their upside's quite as high as those other teams.
Well, of course, if Hartford gets lucky and there is an upset in one of the other games and they can avoid Vermont, that would certainly help them. But, again, obviously, because there's such a gap 4 in the bottom 4 that made this conference tournament, it's tough to see an upset here in the first round, whereas in the NEC, where they reseed, an upset in the first round, not only does it happen every year, it's basically expected at this point in time. So while that conference probably does end up reseeding, I'm not entirely sure that the America East winds up doing that. So again, no odds for that one. Keep an eye out for the odds. If there's anything you want to ask us about, he's at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. I'm at Skating Tripods on Twitter. Let's go to the Colonial Athletic Association, the CAA conference tournament here. This one's down in North Charleston for the final time. Next year it goes to Washington, D.C., so that kind of de facto home court advantage that College of Charleston has will go away for next season's tournament. Hofstra, your favorite, plus 150. Northeastern, plus 215. Charleston, plus 300. Nobody else has a great shot to win this conference tournament. But as far as the venue goes, as far as this tournament historically, what are you seeing here from the Colonial?
Favorites and dogs split right down the middle. Nothing there at all. Teams with a cover rate of less than 50% ATS are 69 and 55. So you get some value on the teams that haven't covered at a really high rate throughout the course of the season. That's the case in most conference tournaments, not just CAA. The under is 74 and 60 since 2005 in the CAA tournament. North Charleston Coliseum, I would say, a bit of an under venue, but nothing drastic. This is one that doesn't rank up there with the MVC or the MAAC or anything like that, even the SoCon. This is a bit of an under tournament, nothing drastic at all.
So Hofstra was the best team in this conference during the regular season. They started 9-0. They beat everybody the first time around. The second time around, they went 6-3 when everybody had revenge against them. So did the second half of conference play kind of make you sour on the Pride a little bit?
Yeah, I like Hofstra. I think they're a good team. But my problem with Hofstra is their defense here of late. The thing that made them so much different earlier in the season compared to what they have been the last couple of years is their defense was so much better. And they're playing that zone defense this year. They've usually been playing man-to-man in past seasons. Zone defense worked really well at the beginning of the season. If you look at Bart Torvik's site, you can look at some really impressive graphs. In their first 11 games in the CAA, 1.12 points per possession allowed or less in every single game. And then in 5 of their last 7, they allowed 1.16 points per possession or higher. So you got Hofstra playing much worse defense later in the season. You wonder, is that more about Hofstra's defense? Is it more about people figuring out the zone defense? I don't know if I know what the answer is there, but I think it's certainly interesting, and it makes me less likely to lay the price on Hofstra based on the way they play defense at the end of the year. Obviously, they have a very, very good offense. They're so efficient on offense that it's hard to go against them. The thing I wanted to do is look and see who's good against the zone, because you got to be pretty good against the zone to beat Hofstra. Northeastern is 99th percentile in man offense, 73rd percentile in zone offense. I will say they look very good against Hofstra this year. They should have won at Hofstra, then did win at home pretty comfortably. College of Charleston's offense versus man is 86th percentile, and zone offense is 85th percentile. So both Northeastern and College of Charleston pretty good against the zone. Here's the problem I have in this one. You don't know who to take between CFC and Hofstra, because Charleston has that, de facto home court advantage, and I don't know what home court would be worth here, because it's not exactly their home court, but they're going to have an advantage. So maybe 1.5 points of home court advantage, I would think, because they don't have a huge home court advantage to start with. But this is a one where I think Northeastern may be the team that's best suited to go against Hofstra as far as, if I knew Northeastern was going to get through that and play Hofstra, I think Northeastern has a real chance of beating Hofstra. The problem is, will Northeastern get there? So Hofstra's path much easier than either CFC or Northeastern. So I think this is a tough one.
I think this really is a tough one. And one of the things that concerns me about Hofstra here, they did start 9-0, but they had a 3-point win over Elon in the first half of conference play. They're not great. Needed 3 overtimes to beat William and Mary. Beat Northeastern by 3. As you mentioned, the game Northeastern probably should have won on the road there. They lost to Northeastern the second time. Only beat College of Charleston by 4 on the road. Lost to UNC Wilmington, who's the bottom seed in this conference tournament. They're number 10. They needed double overtime at home against Towson, who's the number 9 seed. And they lost at home to James Madison in overtime, along with just a 3-point win over Drexel. So in the second half of conference play here, Hofstra really played down to a lot of opponents and lost to Northeastern. So that's what concerns me about them, is that their ceiling has gotten lower and lower as the season's gone along.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I couldn't take Hofstra here. The problem is, who do you take? And I wanted to take Northeastern. As I looked at this, I thought, like I said, Northeastern matches up pretty well with Hofstra. But my concern about Northeastern is I'm not sure they'll get to that point. And number one, because of College of Charleston. But number two, look at who they might play in their first game. They might play Elon in that first game. The 2 games in the regular season against Elon, at home they won in overtime, and on the road they won in overtime. So they obviously don't have any big edge over Elon, and they've been a tough team for them. So, I don't know if Northeastern has a very easy route at all, because their first game is not an easy one for them. So I can't take plus 200 or plus 215 on a team that I think has 3 tough games. So no reason to back them there. I think you'd probably say Charleston may have a little bit better pass than does Northeastern, based on, Drexel's not too great of a team. They have also the home court advantage. So maybe you take Charleston if you want to take somebody from the bottom, or maybe you try to find a big underdog. I don't know, but it's hard for me to find value in this conference.
And I think the problem here, too, is that, you've got some depressed prices here with Northeastern plus 215, Charleston plus 300, and yet the moneyline rollover doesn't seem to be that much more profitable either, because, Northeastern versus Charleston will be a close line. Hofstra versus whoever wins that 2-3 game, if those 2 teams meet, that'll be a pretty close line as well. And, yeah, Charleston, half of their home court advantage maybe, just because they're in the same city and don't have to travel. I don't know. I don't see a lot of value in this conference tournament. I completely agree with you. And so with that, we'll move on to the last conference tournament we're going to talk about here. This is the Summit League Conference Tournament, where South Dakota State, pretty overwhelming favorite. We'll talk about that in a minute. What about the venue here?
Yeah, the under is 18-10 at this new venue. I think this is a pretty solid under venue. If you look at the images, it looks like something that would be a rather difficult venue for shooters, especially considering, this is a conference where they're not going to be able to fill the venue. They're also not going to play in a venue this large usually. One thing I'll point out is the under is 41-18 in the last 59 Summit League tournament games. This is the past venue and this one combined. The biggest reason for this, in my opinion, there's been some really high totals here. You get teams that play very high-scoring games throughout the course of the season with very efficient offenses. These offenses are good, and they're still good, but you get those really high totals, like I said, in the MAAC. Things slow down a little bit. Defense gets better in the conference tournament. I think this will continue to be a pretty good under conference tournament.
All right, so as we look at the odds here for the Summit League, there's not a ton to talk about. I mean, South Dakota State minus 220 favorite here. Nebraska, Omaha, they're the 2 seed. They're plus 700. South Dakota, who was in this conference tournament championship game last year against South Dakota State, they're plus 1,000. North Dakota State plus 1,100. Fort Wayne plus 1,100. This thing really is South Dakota State's tournament to lose.
Yeah, we were talking off the air. I'd be pretty surprised if South Dakota State loses this. Mike Dahl's senior season, going for getting in the big dance every single year. It's hard to find a sleeper here. I mean, who do you want to pick? I mean, Fort Wayne matches up pretty well against South Dakota State, and I think they could give them a bit of a tough game. But do you think they'll get there? I mean, they don't have an easy path. That's the problem with a lot of these is that, if their path's not very easy, if you go banking on that team to win in that final game, well, they might not be in that spot. Fort Wayne plays South Dakota in the first game. South Dakota has a home court advantage in that one based on where this one's being played. So Fort Wayne, even though it's 3 seed, is at a disadvantage in that first game. I think North Dakota State has a pretty easy first game against Oral Roberts, so you could make the case for North Dakota State, but they play South Dakota State in the second game, and I really don't think they're going to beat South Dakota State. Omaha has been a pretty good team this year. Maybe you take Omaha, but I don't think their price is good enough. Actually, I think if you like Omaha, you'll get better than plus 700, so you would want to do a money line rollover there. I think South Dakota State's going to win this conference tournament. If it gets to minus 200, I'd be tempted to take South Dakota State.
Yeah, I mean, I would even take them at this point. I mean, this is kind of the Gonzaga theory for me. I mean, South Dakota State's not as dominant as Gonzaga was, last year in the West Coast Conference, but this line at minus 220 implies about a nice 69% implied probability that South Dakota State wins this conference tournament. I think it's higher than that. I think it's more in the 80% range here. Just because, again, it's Mike Tom's senior season. If they fail in his senior season, I would be stunned. So not only are they the best team, but obviously every team is motivated to get the NCAA tournament, but they are supremely motivated to make it 4 in a row here for their. I mean, he's going to go down in program history as the all-time leading scorer, and I don't think anyone's ever going to touch that record. It's South Dakota State for me. I mean, I think minus 220 is even a little bit of a bargain.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't blame you for taking minus 220 either. I'd say the chances are probably around 75% in my mind as far as them winning this tournament. They have had a couple bad losses in the non-conference, but, yeah, I think this team's rounded into form pretty nicely. And if you think about it's not just Mike Dahm on this team. They have some really good shooters. Jenkins is shooting 47% from three-point range, and he's shooting a lot of threes. They're number 1 in defensive efficiency in the league. Like I said, Omaha's been a good team. They're really efficient on offense, but they're 302nd in defensive efficiency in the country, a very jump shot heavy team. I can't back them. So the only thing I could play here would be South Dakota State.
And even last year, South Dakota State versus South Dakota, they had over 11,000 in attendance for that one, but South Dakota State led that game by almost 20 shortly after halftime. So, that was a 1 versus 2 game, and it wasn't even competitive. So give me the Jackrabbits here, despite paying that little bit chalky price. Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com, also doing the daily stuff for us at bangthebook.com. What's going on over at your website right now, man?
You can check out the March Madness All Access package there at huntersportspicks.com. Also, if you haven't already, sign up for that free picks newsletter. We'll have some free plays, some contests coming up here. So if you haven't signed up for that one already, I encourage you to do so.
Then you can follow Kyle on Twitter at Kyle Hunter Picks. And if you're curious about the America East once odds get posted, you can hit him up on Twitter again at Kyle Hunter Picks or me at Skating Tripod. So Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com and daily at bangthebook.com. Appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again here next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
There you go. There's Kyle Hunter, again, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com and daily at bangthebook.com. So we talked a lot about futures. We talked a lot about hedging. We talked a lot about finding value in these conference tournaments here and certainly in the month of March. And when it comes to finding value, price shopping is key. Doesn't matter if you're buying a car, making a sports bet, whatever it is, you always want to make sure that you're getting the best number. One place where you can look to do that is over at PropSwap, where you can find the best numbers on futures. PropSwap is a marketplace where people buy and sell active sports bets. Last year, thousands of tickets were sold at odds better than any sports book, including, if you look over on the NBA side, one customer who bought a Warriors to win the championship ticket at 2-1 odds because you're buying the bet from another person. Sellers are able to offer you their bet at odds that sports books could not even dream of offering. So start getting the best number by going to propswap.com/BTB. Again, propswap.com/BTB. Great time of year to do that, obviously, here with conference tournaments and March Madness.